Eugene Pelteret van Reflective Learning kuier ook vandag hier by ons en ons gesels spesifiek oor die probleme wat hulle geïdentifiseer het en daarna verwys ek na die Suid-Afrikaanse Instituut vir Professionele Rekenmeesters. Geïdentifiseer het by skole aangaande wiskunde. En ons gesels vanoggend ook oor die oplossings daarvoor en hoe om leerders en onderwysers by te staan. Good morning, Eugene.
Good morning. How are you doing this morning?
Lovely, thank you. Great to have you on the show with us. Eugene, you work very closely with schools across the country. When it comes to maths, you've identified a lot of challenges. What are the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think the number one challenge that we see is something called learning backlogs. Now, if you imagine maths as sort of like a tower that builds through from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12, often students can be missing foundational gaps in their understanding that sort of weakens the whole tower. And unfortunately, as students go through, sometimes the gaps can get so big that teachers will be teaching what they're supposed to in class, but students really struggling to understand what they're being taught. And so this sort of leads to a second problem that then students start to believe that they simply can't do maths. You know, we have so many students that say, I'm just not a maths person. And that's not true. We actually, you know, we can all do maths. And so, unfortunately, then as students head towards the end of grade 9, they have to make a really critical subject choice of carrying on with core maths or choosing a different alternative. And unfortunately, we don't have enough students that are choosing core maths in our country. And so that can actually limit their career choices later on.
Eugene, we always place very much importance or focus on mathematics. Why is maths important?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with, you know, the career choices that students want to make later on. It's important to say that not all subjects or, you know, or professions require core maths, you know, things like architecture or graphic design. But as a country, we need professionals. We need, you know, engineers and doctors and pilots and accountants. And so if we don't have this base of students that are choosing core maths, by the time that they are choosing, you know, what careers they want to go into in tertiary education, we don't have the sufficient number of students that are choosing. And so then actually that starts to impact our economy later on when we start thinking around, you know, real practical problems like our roads, or when you start speaking about load shedding and electricity. These require highly technical people, and that needs maths at the end of the day. So this is not just about students and sort of a school-based problem. This actually has an impact later on for us all around the country.
Eugene, realistically speaking, if we look at pass rates in South Africa, students need to get like 35 or 40% to pass a subject, for example, like mathematics. So now I'm passing my matric year with 40% mathematics. I'm studying to become a teacher. I take maths as a subject. I only need 60% or 50% or whatever that is to pass, to become a mathematics teacher. So I've barely passed maths in matric. I'm barely passing university, but now I become that maths teacher. Do you think we have a problem there?
Yeah, look, I think the research shows that, you know, there are some gaps in terms of the content knowledge of teachers. And it's not to say that they're insurmountable. They can be solved. And even in careers, we also continue to learn, you know, every one of us. But there's definitely that initial teacher training. There needs to be a greater focus and a greater emphasis placed on essentially ensuring that teachers have the right knowledge themselves and the right teaching methodology, and especially in the primary school years. You know, in primary school, teachers don't have to be math specialists in order to teach maths, and so that's often where the gap, you know, starts. But to say that, you know, we need to place a massive emphasis on the country, I think is fair to say.
Eugene, again, with the subject of the workload that teachers face in South Africa specifically, and the dependency that the students have on a specific teacher. You referred earlier to the fact that it's like a tower, and once you miss one of the gaps of the layers, the student struggles to understand the rest of the work. That seems to be a very, very big issue at this stage. And surely the only solution to that is then to actually go back and revisit some of the concepts right from the foundation stages. But with teachers under pressure and the workload, it's very difficult. How do students cope with that? Students who don't have the access to a tutor on another level, private tutor, or the finances to pay for extra classes. Where do these students go?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to know is it's really important for us to understand just how big the problem is. Actually, the majority of our students by the end of grade 9 are on average 4 years behind where they need to be. So it's not just going back 1 or 2 years. There's a really big foundational gap that we're missing. And often those students, unfortunately, get lost along the way. The majority of our country can't afford personal tutoring. And even that tutoring often doesn't have the impact that we hope it does. And so it is really difficult. Teachers are torn between, do I go back and try to help these students where I can see the gaps are, or do I continue to teach the curriculum, which is actually my core job at the end of the day? And so, I think this is where we need to have a mind shift or a rethink around education in South Africa. What programs are we very intentionally putting in place to go back and catch up those gaps? Because you're very right, that's exactly what has to happen. We have to go back and rebuild that sort of missed knowledge that we've missed over time. But the exciting thing is that we've seen that it is possible. It's not a doom and gloom sort of scenario. There are solutions in place that are found to be working.
If we have an issue with maths and not enough students complete matric with maths, what does that mean for the future? What's the practical implication?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I mean, the practical implication is that it places a massive pressure on universities. Universities have to be able to hold the standard of the graduation of their students, but at the same time, they also need to graduate students into the workplace, because businesses need to, and even the public sector, and we need to be employing more and more people. So there's a really big a pressure point at first year university in particular, where a lot of students fall down, in engineering maths, for instance. So the practicality is that actually in the long run, we don't have the base of competent employees actually for our workforce. And that naturally has an impact on our economy and so on. So it is a really big problem that we actually need to address as early on in our schooling sector as possible.
Eugene, thank you very much for your time this morning. It was great talking to you, and it's clearly a subject that we need to focus on.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.